I see
Yes.
some people nodding. Okay, so I try to focus on the issue of non-binary legal gender recognition in the Netherlands, which is not so easy because there's very limited legal information on it. But I tried, and maybe it will also allow me to stick to time, hopefully at least. So what I want to tell you is that at least 4 people now in the Netherlands have this X. It's called differently. Sex could not be determined, but in practice it means that on their passports, for example, they will have an X. So 4 people, and I will explain how they did it, despite the fact that the law only allows it in circumstances that are different from their circumstances. And then I want to discuss a few bottlenecks or objections by the government with you. So, well, first of all, to the side, you see the 3 people that actually got an X. Below, in the photo below, on the right is the person who in 2018 got their X. Leone Zegers. They all looked for publicity, for media attention. So I don't think there's any problem showcasing them. They are like the forefighters in this struggle. To the left below is Nanoa, who was the second, and on top is Jara Jadi, the third, 2020 actually. The fourth is a baby. Not a baby born in the Netherlands, but in China, who was adopted by a Dutch couple. So in the Netherlands, the only legal way, that is on the basis of law, how to get an X is if you are a baby born with sexual characteristics that are not clearly either male or female, and so a draft certificate can be made up saying that the sex could not be determined. After 3 months, a final certificate will be made up, and this is a possibility since 1970, so much longer than Germany, but even in the Netherlands, nobody knew when in 2013 Germany changed its law. So that shows you how very little known this possibility is. Generally, parents don't want to make use of it. They want their child to be either a boy or a girl so that they can answer the first question that is asked. In 2013, in the context of a research that was commissioned by the Ministry of Justice, I did that with a colleague. We also had a query done, so kind of digital search in the personal registration collection. And it turned out that at that point, among all like 17 million Dutch people, there were just 67 people with unknown gender. Now, of those 67, there was only 1 person who had been born in the Netherlands. Why is that important? It is important because, for example, German and Italian identity cards don't have a gender marker. So people come to the registration, they tell the registrar, hey, I am living here as an exchange student or for whatever reason at all, and I want to register myself at the municipality. You need legal proof for everything that you tell them. So for your name, your date of birth, etc., also for your gender. If you don't have your passport, which always has a gender marker, if you have an ID without a gender marker, there's no legal proof of your gender. And so if they are really following the rules, the registrars should leave that open. Mostly they don't, but so 66 people had this done, And then there was one person born in the Netherlands, but we don't know who that was or how they came by the X. So what about these 4 people who do have an X? The Chinese adoption baby, that was an issue of pragmatism by the parents. The parents assumed that the baby had intersex condition, and they thought it was much better to get the baby without a gender marker to the Netherlands and then see what would happen, rather than have a passport indicating a gender marker and then later on having to change it. This is not a legal possibility, but the parents managed to put so much pressure on a specific registrar that they just registered it, issued the passport with an X. So very ultra legem, so to speak. Then the adults. In 2007, there was a first attempt which reached the High Court of the Netherlands from someone who said that they would like to be registered as gedesexueerd, desexualized maybe, or desexed even. This was rejected because the court said that the law is very clear, and even though there is this trend in Europe, as is always or often stressed by the European Court of Human Rights, the trend is still within the binary, not outside, so the claim was rejected. But in 2018, this Leone Zegers was successful. Now, how did they do it? I will briefly give you this overview of the Dutch legal system, which is basically a 2-track system, different rules for trans and intersex peoples to some extent. So sex is attributed at birth as either male or female, and this is the case in most countries in the world, and certainly in those where Napoleon passed by. And as I said, there is this exception for babies whose sex cannot be determined. They may have that X, first on a temporary certificate, and then if it still can't be determined after 3 months, they will have a final document with this statement, but we don't know whether there are any. Yeah, and so there's the query. The Dutch legal framework regarding change. The presumption underlying the registration system is that it's unchangeable, that it's fixed. People are male or female for their entire lives. Again, we have an exception. Here we have an exception for trans people and one for intersex individuals. But trans people can change their marker as of 16 years of age. Required is an expert declaration. It's not a diagnosis. It's what you need is a declaration from an authorized expert who says, yes, I am convinced that that person is convinced that they belong to the opposite sex. You can only change from male to female or from female to male. You also need at least 1 year of lawful residence in the Netherlands. The exception for intersex individuals is different. It's not a change of your marker, it's a correction of a mistake. So the assumption is that everybody's sex is registered correctly at birth. If you're trans, it needs to be changed because it doesn't fit your personality or something. If you're intersex, it was just a mistake in reading your genitals, let's say. So it's a different legal procedure. Also, to change it later in life, for trans people, they can just go to the registry with this declaration, but to correct a marker, you need to go to court. So Leone succeeded in obtaining this X, and it's a very confusing judgment. Initially, Leone stated that they were intersex, had an intersex condition, and therefore wanted to be registered in some kind of a non-binary way. So the court ordered a medical diagnosis. The medical professional said, well, we have a look, but they basically couldn't establish it. Then the court kind of moved on to like a gender identity frame in which this whole thing was constructed. And then in the end, they applied the rule on intersex to Leona. So they moved from intersex to trans to intersex, and they agreed and ordered the registrar to make up a new birth certificate for Leona with this thing developed for babies. We couldn't establish the gender. So this case goes very much beyond anything that the legislator foresaw, but they decided not to appeal this decision, and so Leona is completely safe with her X on her passport and her birth certificate, etc. 2019, the second case. The third case this year was a bit more nuanced. The court here at least did not order the registrar to draw up a new birth certificate, but said that they had to make the changes on the birth certificate, which is more in line with the procedural prescriptions. So the national consideration after these three, the baby didn't get that much attention, but these three adults who achieved this X, the government decided also explicitly, they told Parliament, to leave it to the courts for now. For those intersex people who were upset that to just change from male to female or female to male, they have to go to the court rather than just to the registry. The minister said, well, then just behave as if you were trans. It doesn't matter because you don't need a medical certificate. So the government also commissioned several reports. On top is one that I did with a colleague in 2014, for which we also had the query done, which is on whether it's even possible to have no gender marker or a third one. But our starting point was no gender marker at all. And obviously it's possible. I mean, it's a social construct to have a registration as such. So if it's a social construct, you can also change it. But that's not to say that it's easy. This whole idea of legal gender is so much ingrained in legislation. And you can also see this in Germany, where they really sometimes struggle to tease it out where it is. We asked the student assistant to note rules, so legal provisions that made some kind of a distinction, or even in language between men and women. So the words widow, widower, or father, mother, he, him, she, her. And it was like 170 pages long document. And that's just the legislation. That's not policies or underlying documents. So it's complicated, let's say. And the more direct discrimination, whether benign or really discriminatory, the more difficult it is to change it. So the second report is from 1 year ago, and it is about the consequences of having no gender markers, no registration, or less registration, including a kind of estimate of costs. Well, those are significant because especially computer programs need to be changed. Another report was published that tries to encourage organizations to ask less frequently for gender. So the railways, when you want to get your money back because the trains were delayed again, they ask you for your gender. Why? Objections from the government. I'm sure you must be familiar with all these elements. That links together very much with the purposes, the functions of information on gender. What is it used for? And if you stop registration of gender, you certainly need other ways to organize certain policies, for example. So people are concerned, what will we do with sex segregated institutions? And I have to stress that these concerns go beyond the very basic objections by TERFs or anti-trans feminists or trans-suspicious feminists or whatever. What do you do? Where do you send people? Of course, the easy answer is that you should make prisons, well, either get rid of them at all or make them very safe spaces. But what do you do in the meantime, whilst they are not yet safe spaces? So sports is another topic that's maybe even more complicated. Affiliation law, Jens already mentioned it, will someone be the father, the mother, or the parent. In the Netherlands, actually, we had a case where someone was qualified as the parent, but then when trans law, when it became easier to change your legal gender, that was also changed, and we now have the same attribution law as Germany. The person who gives birth is the mother regardless, and so on. Well, costs. How to address people respectfully is also a problem for many of our people in government, in the executive. Identification, identity fraud, sex-specific health, preventive health screening. How can we send people letters to have a check on their uterus if we don't know whether they're male or female? Of course, that's a nonsense argument in the sense that you can have much more precise systems by just asking people, do you have a uterus? And emancipation policies, what do we do with quota, etc. Other problems of the current state of play, it leaves the battle to the stakeholders, not just the battle to get an X, but also the consequences of that X. If they want to marry in the Netherlands, probably first the forms need to be changed because they now say male, male, female, female, and not something else. And that's just an easy example. Most programs online, they are very inflexible. You have to say either male or female. What do you do if you are neither? Another kind of objection is that the third box, this idea, strengthens actually the dominant categories. So that's one important reason that NGOs in the Netherlands and many other people, including myself, basically favor abolition rather than expanding this registration system. And then there are, of course, privacy issues. Neumann Wipfler, not sure whether you're familiar with the article of his, but he distinguishes between three possible ways forward. Definitional expansion, so who can be in the box male and who can be in the box female. I think in the Netherlands, we have to some extent expanded the definitions by at least allowing people who can still get pregnant to have a male gender marker. Categorical expansion by the courts by allowing people to obtain an X or a gender could not be determined. Abolition, not really, but there is some movement in the direction of abolition, at least in the government's attempts to reduce the number of times that you're asked for your gender, and to also try and encourage others, institutions, businesses, etc., to make less use of information on gender. So we are doing all three, but the NGOs and me are in favor of abolition rather than the other two. Thank you.
Okay,